Hopefully, hopefully everybody can hear me well and see me okay. I'm going to just double check and let you know. Here's me. I'm Alan, and welcome everybody. It's great to have you on this webinar. Um, it's been a busy 45 days. AARP is always up on the hill, and this year's legislative session was no different. 1,000 bills were introduced, and unfortunately, or fortunately, however you look at it, only about 500 or so ever actually get considered. But today, we are really pleased to have Charlie Evans on our webinar to answer any questions you may have about this session and how the issues brought forward will affect Utahns and especially older Utahns. We absolutely hope and expect that this will be a two-way conversation. So feel free to put your questions in, be thinking about questions, and we're happy to try and answer those. To let you know who Charlie Evans is, he has spent the last 28 years as one of our state's top lobbyists. He was originally raised in southeastern United States, and he's made Utah his home for the last 40 years. And if you want to proceed and you want to ask Charlie a question, you can leave it in the chat. So please engage with the chat. Charlie, thank you so much for being here today and sharing your expertise with our listeners. Do you mind sharing a short recap of how you feel like the 2026 session went, maybe some of the big issues and what your feeling was this past year? I've kind of heard it was a little bit of a calmer year. I wonder if you agree with that. Charlie, it looks like you're on mute. Maybe we're still working on getting Charlie connected fully. We can see you, Charlie. I just can't hear you.
Is that better? Is that better?
That's it.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Yeah, this I think was the most productive year we've had since COVID, and I'm not. There's a number of different factors I think that could be counted in there, but it was certainly a calmer year, even though they stretched it right till midnight. I think the reason that they stretched it till midnight is they were more deliberative in the actions they took, which I think is always beneficial.
That's good. So, do you feel like the vibe up there this year was different than in other years?
I think that's very perceptive, Al, and I do agree with that. We were able, and we did see more bad legislation being killed in committee hearings, which is something we had, which was it used to be typical of the legislature, but was something that we have not seen in the last 3 or 4 years. And I think that was a refreshing return to the way things used to be done, where bad legislation could get heard in a committee hearing and killed right or die right there. And I think that that really is the difference we saw this year over the previous 3 or 4 years.
Any specific examples that kind of come to mind? I know I'm thinking about the renaming of Harvey Milk Boulevard. That was one that seemed to get a lot of like early intensity and then just fizzled out.
Yes, I think that's a very good example of it. Extreme example, sure, because it was so bad. I, for one, certainly don't mind, not opposed to naming something after Charlie Kirk, but there was no reason to rename Harvey Milk Boulevard. And I just think that that was gratuitous by the sponsor of that bill. And and the legislature, which when I originally saw that legislation, given what I saw, have seen the last 3 or 4 years, I did expect it to pass, but it got stopped dead in its tracks, as it should. And a lot of things by that legislator and other legislators who conduct their business similar to the way he does. A lot of that legislation is what I was referring to here a few minutes ago that got killed in committees. And I think if you look at other legislation sponsored by that legislator, none of it passed this year. And I think that's very good.
Yeah, it was an interesting. It kind of set the tone for me as I was kind of watching the legislative session this year. That that particular bill just kind of really being pushed to the off ramp very quickly set a tone that I hadn't really seen much of. Shifting gears, what were some of the big issues that AARP was working on, and how did those fare in this legislative session?
We had a really good session, Alan. I think for the issues that we worked on, crypto, we were able to very positively influence that legislation that was eventually passed. We were able to make sure in a very I guess the best way to describe our budget year was we had a flat budget year. There was some one-time money, but really no what they call ongoing money. The difference being real quickly for our listeners is one-time money is revenue that was generated in the last fiscal year, which they don't think would be generated in the next fiscal year. And so legislature can only spend that money one time. And then ongoing money is new revenues that were generated in the last fiscal year that they believe will be available ongoing in the future. And so that can be spent in an ongoing way. Of course, future legislators can change that money. And so in a flat budget year, I think making sure we got the Meals for Wheels, Meals on Wheels, and uh, other items like that are important to our community. Getting those funded, I don't was not a foregone conclusion this year, and we were able to do that, and I felt like it was very successful. I think the legislature looked at our request and the request, of other like-minded people, not just AARP, but other like-minded groups, and realized that they were important to do, and we were able to get those funded. And then at the end, in the very last night, on I we were one of those groups that were watching something until midnight, and that was the bills that would have changed and disrupted the circuit breaker, property tax breaker for low income elderly homeowners. And having that die in the last night, I think was kind of the cherry on the top. And it was, as you know, Alan, because you were so involved in it, it was, you know, it was a 45-day slog to get to that point. And the clock hit 10 o'clock and I looked and that bill was only 10 down, I thought that was going to get hurt. I did believe we had the votes to kill it had it come up. And I think the sponsor of that realized that it was going to die too, because we had worked the House floor so hard against that bill that he didn't even bother to have it brought up. And so when you consider those three things, I think that we had a really successful year.
Well, I appreciate that. And I want to highlight Joe Hirabayashi is our AARP staff member who is a full time lobbyist at the legislature. He wasn't feeling great today, so he's excused from this webinar. But I want to just highlight how much work, Charlie, you and Joe put in. It does feel like we kind of narrowed in on some very specific topics, but those topics were tough. And this property tax bill is a perfect example of one that we watched early on because it didn't seem too egregious. But over time, as it got pushed through the substitute process, it did kind of become an egregious bill. And we'll talk in detail about some of the things that were so bad in this bill. But you guys worked, like you said, right up until that last moment.
Exactly, and you described it perfectly, Alan. The original draft of the bill, and this is either the third or the fourth year that we worked on this bill with this same sponsor. And the original draft of the bill was not egregious in any way, but they kept coming out with more different drafts. And I think by the time we were at the last night, we were on the sixth version of the bill, and each version of the bill, as you just pointed out, became worse and worse to the point where we were left with no other option but to oppose it. And I, and we were successful. I think the reason we were successful, it was too much of a reach by the sponsor. It's not that we were opposed to a a different program that people could choose from between doing a deferment and a circuit breaker. but we just didn't want to get rid of the circuit breaker. There's not that many people in the state that rely on it, but those who do rely on it do rely on it. And phasing it out, even the way they were proposing to phase it out, we just felt like was too punitive to people who relied on it. And those are the people that we, as you know, Alan, and you, because we get the direction from you, those are the people that we're looking out for at the state legislature. And so I got to say, I was chewing my nails that night. I felt like I lived, 10 years in that last 2 hours. But when it died, I was so relieved and so happy. And there's a reasonable chance that legislator who's been sponsoring these bills may not be back in the next legislative session, in which case that specific issue may not be taken up in exactly the same way again. And I'm certainly not wishing that on that legislator, but we have beat that back now. I think this is the third year, or it may be the fourth year that we've beaten that back. And every year we start off, or last couple of years, we started off in a good place, and he just keeps making it worse and worse. And I hope if it does come back, he will be a little more open minded and listen to the concerns that we have, because we've demonstrated that we can make those concerns heard at the legislature.
Yeah, yeah, I think we've operated in very good faith there, and it's been frustrating to me to see that, tax policy is always the devil in the details. And this is one of those that, like you say, it started off not egregious, but by the time it cooked all the way down, we could see that there was a lot of burn in the pot, and it was not great.
As you've explained to me in the past too, Alan, when you're dealing with tax policy that affects everyone, there is always going to be what we refer to as unintended consequences. In other words, things that 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 the bill requires or does that weren't anticipated or foreseen at the time the bill was drafted. And that was at least my main concern with this bill is there's going to be stuff here that we're not seeing, that we're not catching, that people rely on, that it's going to cause a major disruption in people's lives. And we're going to have to come back here and fix it. But that's too late for the people whose lives and financial situations have been disrupted. And so that's why we advocated, let's go slow and do this in bits and pieces to minimize this idea of these unintended consequences, because that legislation was too broad, too sweeping, and there would have been huge unintended consequences, in my
Well,
opinion.
that is fantastic work, and I really appreciate it. To everybody who's on the webinar today, remember, if you've got a question, feel free to write it in the chat. We'll get to your questions in just a little bit. We're really eager for this to be a two-way conversation, so don't hesitate to use that chat feature to ask a question, put in comments. Feel free to do that throughout the entire webinar.
Yeah, I'd
So,
love to answer your questions.
yeah, Charlie's the best at answering your questions. And it doesn't have to be just specifically about the issues that we confronted. Charlie's got a broad knowledge. And with 28 plus years in the legislature, there's very few people who are better at knowing the history, the dynamics, the processes, how it works. And so if you've got questions, don't hesitate to reach out. So we've talked about the property tax relief amendments. The next one that kind of comes to mind are our local land use regulations. Can you talk a little bit about housing? What the vibe is up there on housing? Is it still kind of one of those critically important issues? And what this bill would have done?
This is a great question, and it is something that has preoccupied our legislature now uh, since even before COVID, but since COVID for sure. And that is the cost of housing, especially along the Wasatch Front. I have heard estimates I've heard the speaker and the Senate president both say in public forums that by their estimation, that the cost of a new house, 20 to 30% of the cost of a new house is due to regulation. And that seems excessive to me. It seems excessive to most people. Obviously, there has to be some regulation, and that regulation needs to be, in terms of protecting the health and safety and welfare of Utahns. There are other factors, of course, that they are trying to get around, and one of the things they're doing is making it being more aggressive and setting up what they call tax increment financing for housing. Uh, for a long time, our legislature was adamantly opposed to tax increment uh, financing for housing. And if I can just explain what tax increment financing is for some people like that, is that what happens is the taxing entities get together and strike a deal with the developer, and the developer gets a break on some of the property taxes, some percentage of the property tax that would have been paid. And in exchange for that, they have to build so much low income housing. And our concern or our interest in that is if taxpayers are going to be giving up the revenue stream that they would have gotten from the property tax, then we need to have a high percentage of low and middle income housing that's being developed in a specific project. I'm not sure that the legislature has gotten there yet. I think the number is too low, and we end up subsidizing luxury, too much luxury housing and commercial projects, which may not need that level of public assistance. But I think the legislature is seeing that this has to happen, and they are doing more about it. The other thing they began doing is making it easier for people who own homes to have what they call mother-in-law apartments. I think that's what they call them. In other words, you put in a
Accessory dwelling units.
yes, exactly. I couldn't come up with that term, Alan. And I think we have a lot of people that move in those types of units with their children or grandchildren, or they have them and let their children and grandchildren live with them. And some cities, through their zoning laws, make those illegal, and the state legislature is rolling some of that back, which I think is beneficial. Obviously, you got to be careful when you're dealing with local zoning laws; those are there for a reason, and we need to understand those before we try to upset them. But I think that if you were to ask me what kind of grade I would give the legislature on housing, I'd be interested to hear you answer that question, Alan. But I think it's about a C plus.
Yeah.
They've done some stuff in the last couple of years that's been good. They could have and should have done more, and hopefully we can get more done in the future.
Yeah, it feels to me like the policy, I would give maybe a B minus. The implementation, I would give a C around there. I do think there's a lot of energy, or there has been anyway, year over year, a lot of energy around housing. It's hard to see them actually getting things done. And this is a bill that I'm pretty excited about because it is one of those kind of get it done. It requires that any municipality with blocks of land larger than 10,000 square feet, which is about a quarter of an acre, a little less than a quarter of an acre. If you want to build a detached accessory dwelling unit or mother-in-law apartment, sometimes called granny flats, they have to allow you to do that now. And then if a municipality wants to lower that amount to say 6,000 square foot lots or even 5,000 square foot lots, they can do it. But I think it sets a nice floor that says, hey, if you've got a 10,000 square foot lot or larger, you are always going to be allowed to build a detached accessory dwelling unit. And that's a big deal because, like you say, there's a lot of folks who, what I hear a lot of folks say is, I'm going to build that detached accessory dwelling unit that has all the ADA compliance. It's going to be, easy to turn a wheelchair in. It's going to have grab bars and all the things that I might need as an older adult. I'm going to live in that, and then I'm going to rent my big house to either a family member, or I'm going to rent it to someone else, and then draw the income from it. And that's a really nice strategy for people who have a paid off home on a relatively large lot. that's a great way for people to think that through. So this is, I
It
think, a fairly big victory for AARP.
it really is, Alan. And as you know, and our listeners may not know, but as you know, because it's been at your direction, we've been working at this now. This was the third year that
Yeah,
we were working at this, and we almost got it across the finish line last year. It was heartbreaking to see it fail there at the last minute, but we did get it across the finish line this year. I think it's hugely beneficial. I have a lot that's relatively large that I live in, and my wife and I have always wanted to build a kind of a mother-in-law apartment situation there. And now we can. And the cities, and I don't think we're down on cities at all. I don't want to be, but they oppose this because it kind of undoes some of their zoning regulations. But I think it was done in a responsible way, where people in neighborhoods can be comfortable that if this happens in their neighborhood, it's going to be done in a responsible way with people that have lots big enough to support those types of dwellings. I just think it's a wonderful idea. I think it's going to help a lot of people, seniors and people and young families who are looking for their first home. I think it's benefits everybody.
excellent. Rob asked the question following up on these accessory dwelling units. Are there regulations for accessory dwelling unit use related to short-term rentals in this legislation? I know that's a big issue. The fear is that you build the ADU and then you turn it into an Airbnb, and all of a sudden the neighborhood is bombarded with partying kids in your ADU. I don't recall if there was anything in this around in the bill. I know most municipalities have things about that. Was there anything in this bill?
No, you're correct, Alan. And Utah passed, I want to say 7 or 8 years ago, a law regarding Airbnb or VRBO apartments. And cities can still regulate those. In other words, they can decide whether or not to have them. What they can't do, which does hinder them, cities, is, let's say if you live in Salt Lake City and you have an apartment or a house that you use on Airbnb, they cannot go on the Airbnb site and see that you have a apartment to rent, on Airbnb, and then go cite you. If somebody in the neighborhood, however, complains that you are Airbnb, then they can go cite you. So those can still be those overnight rentals. I can't remember exactly what they call them, but I call them Airbnb rentals. Those are still regulated by the city, but they are regulated as to how they can enforce it, and they cannot use. They're not supposed to anyway be able to use the sites as an enforcement mechanism. They have to wait until they get a complaint. And so I hope that answers our listeners' question. If not, if they'll refine it, I'll be happy to address it.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And Cochelle mentioned that she's getting ready to build an ADU on her property from Clinton City, and the building permit should come out next week, and she's very excited about that. I
All
will
right.
be
Hi,
too.
Coachelle. It's great to see you. Hope you're doing well.
Yeah, we love Cochelle. This is exciting. Cochelle used to work for AARP and has been retired now for about 6 months, a
We
little
miss
longer,
her.
about 8 months. It's hard to believe that time flies so fast, doesn't it?
Yeah, we miss her.
Uh,
Thank you.
oh yeah, thank you. Cochelle actually came on. Do you want to tell us, Cochelle, a little bit about the process that you went through for your ADU?
Well, the beginning stages are always the harder, deciding what you want to build, how much room you want, all the setbacks. Every building department's going to be different. So it was talking to, people at the building department, getting the plans drawn, and working through all that process. I think that was lengthy. So we're hoping to get this done before September, because my son's going into reserves, and so they're going to move into the big house, and I'm going to move in the ADU. So I'm real excited.
Isn't that
That's
awesome?
great.
I
Yeah,
think
that's
that is just fantastic and a great way for anybody who is thinking about how do we make sure that the young people in our lives. I know my son who's 24, my daughter who's 19, they'd love to get out of the house, and trying to find a way to support these young people in their housing is just it's a nonstop thought and a nonstop battle. I know, Charlie, you've dealt with that as well with your family.
Yes, I have children about that age too, and some a little bit older. And, I remember what I was like when I was their age, and I thought it was hard then. I don't know how they do it anymore, but, the cost of housing is so expensive. And so anything we can do to help them, and it helps our membership as well. And I just think anything that helps both of those groups, two groups that need to be helped, is certainly a win-win. And I really feel like that with this legislation. And it's been a 3-year process. I'm not trying to say we're the only ones working on it. We certainly weren't, but we've been there in the trenches for 3 years. It was so gratifying to see it get across the finish line.
Absolutely. Great comments from Rob. Great comments from Cochelle. Keep it coming, folks. We are really eager to answer any questions that you might have. Let's turn to the senior nutrition private donation incentives. This is kind of a fun bill that created a matching fund, basically. I'd love to hear a little bit more about the details. I'm not sure if they actually put details in the legislation, but it creates an incentive for private donations if people want to donate to Meals on Wheels or donate to the senior nutrition programs. There's an incentive to do so now.
This was such a great idea, Alan. It really was. Our legislature, rightfully so, I think, loves these kind of matching things where the private sector comes in with an amount of money and they match it. And they love those programs, as you can imagine why, because it's a multiplication. It multiplies the impact that they can have at the state. And in a flat budget year, to come up with this idea, propose it, they latched right onto it, and we were able to get that passed along with other like-minded groups. I think we'll see almost, if I understand correctly, and of course, I'm not involved in administration of the program, but if I understand correctly, this will have an immediate impact. We'll be able to see an expansion of this program, and so that more seniors are receiving more Meals on Wheels almost immediately. At least that's the way the sponsors sold that to the legislature. I should be careful saying almost immediately, but in the spring, at the latest, beginning in the new fiscal year in July. And so that's a wonderful thing. It's something that we can all take pride in, that people who rely on that type of service can rely on it with more confidence now, and it will expand to help more people. And I just think it's a wonderful thing that I really have appreciated being involved with this year.
Yeah, I love this. And, public-private partnership, that is like a gold word, if you can say things like that up at the legislature.
Really is.
Our legislators love public-private partnerships, and this is a great one. What many people don't know already is that Meals on Wheels is this amazing program, because about a quarter of the funding comes from people who make donations. About a quarter comes from the cities and counties who are supporting it. About a quarter comes from property taxes and county taxes. And then about a quarter comes from the federal government. So it's this wonderful umbrella of, everybody being involved. And the other thing about Meals on Wheels that I just want to highlight to everybody, it's not just the meal, it's the daily interaction with the driver who comes in and says, is everything okay? Are you doing all right? Because those Meals on Wheels drivers frequently are the people who are reporting a fall, reporting somebody who's self-neglecting. This is, and it's cheap. It's so inexpensive to have a volunteer deliver a meal compared to somebody being in a skilled nursing facility. And that's really what it's designed for, is to make sure folks are keeping their nutrition up and have somebody connect with them every day.
Yes, having people put eyes on these seniors on daily is so valuable to everybody in the community, especially those seniors who not only rely on that food. And just as you pointed out, Alan, I don't want to labor the point here, but having that daily contact. And sometimes, sadly, that's the only contact that these seniors may have with a human being during the day. And it's hugely important. I just want to reemphasize that.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, as we're kind of going through this, please feel free to continue asking questions in the chat. Charlie, I do want to go back to SB 78. We just had Michelle come on. Oh, and I wanted to say thank you to France. France has dropped in a number of uh, links to the actual bill. So if you want to see the actual bill language, France has dropped a few of those in there. And thank you for doing that, France. Michelle has asked a question about going back to Senate Bill 78. I want to just kind of talk a little bit more about what may happen in the interim. And if this does come back, so maybe give a big picture overview again of what the bill sponsor was trying to accomplish, and then where we think this might be going.
I will just say real quickly, I think great to put those links in. I think that was a really good idea. Thanks for whoever did that. And as you go through, and as people are looking at that, the stuff that is underlined, it was the new and proposed language. If it doesn't have a line under it, then it's already state law. And the underlined language is what is proposed to be added to state law. And then the language that's proposed to be stricken is easy to see because there will be a line through it. And so I think that hopefully will help people that are looking at those bills get through a little bit more quickly. And I think, Alan, to answer your question, it's going to depend a lot about what happens in these elections. The sponsor of that bill is facing a pretty stiff primary challenge. And I certainly am not in the business of prognosticating, but when I listen how these going to go, there are a lot of money. A lot of people seem to think that this legislator that sponsored that bill may not be back in the legislature next year. Certainly, I'm not advocating for that, and AARP does not involve itself in political campaigns, and I'm not trying to suggest that at all. But however, so I would think that if the sponsor of that bill does fail or it isn't back in the legislature, someone else may take it up. But I would expect the next legislator to take it up to be a little more open-minded than we've dealt with so far. The senator that's the sponsor of this bill has very fixed ideas, and he's a senator. He can do it any way he wants to, but he didn't really take a lot of suggestions. And as we pointed out, subsequent drafts of the bill just kept getting worse. But if he does win, I would expect that we will pick right back up in the next legislative session where we left off in this legislative session, and we'll have this all to do over again. He doesn't, I don't want to be mean here because I don't dislike him, but he doesn't ever seem to learn from one year to the next. He keeps just trying the same thing again, and in the end, we're able to beat him. And there was a lot of complicating factors that went into that defeat this year that didn't have anything to do with this bill, but had to do with interpersonal conflicts between the sponsor of this legislature, the sponsor of this bill, and other pieces of legislation that he sponsored that he got on the wrong side of some House members. And in the end, that was to our benefit. I hope that wasn't too confusing.
No, I think that is very helpful. And as you say, Charlie, we at AARP, we never get involved in individual races. We don't support anybody. We don't put money behind anyone. We're all about bipartisan ideas that benefit people. And it's one of the things that I've really appreciated about your lobbying efforts, Charlie, is you really understand it and get it, that we're not out there beating any specific political drum. Good ideas come from both sides of the parties, and we're eager to help with those good ideas, and we're eager to shut down bad ideas. And unfortunately, this is one of those bills that started out fairly neutral, one that we did not think was a terrible idea. What the bill basically did was to say, in addition to the circuit breaker program that exists, We could add some deferral property, raise the amounts a little bit to make it more opportune for folks who are a little higher income to be able to defer their taxes. Those are all relatively good things. But as it progressed, it became less and less about expanding and more about restricting and pushing it all onto the counties and making it in a very difficult administration. And at that point, the counties opposed it. We opposed it. Everybody had to oppose it. And of course, it died. So, Michelle, I hope that kind of answers those questions about the background of what was happening there.
When it was, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut
no,
you
go
off.
ahead, please.
When, just to put maybe a little finer point on it, when we felt like it was expanding options and creating options for more people, we were supportive. But as the number of the bills kept coming, the substitutes kept coming down, it became more and more restrictive to where we felt like it was offering less options to fewer people. And that's when we changed our position from neutral to oppose. And I'm glad you mentioned the Utah Association of Counties, sometimes referred to as UAC, because they were it was great to work with them on this bill and link arms with them. And I'm not sure we could have killed it without them. And so we do owe them a debt of thanks.
Absolutely. Pat asks the question whether there was any discussion this year about eliminating more or all of the Utah state tax on Social Security. And as you think about that, maybe peer into the crystal ball a little bit. What does the future look like on that topic?
Well, that's been our one of the causes we've worked on for as long as I've worked for AARP. That's been one of our very top priorities, as it was this year. The problem we had this year, and the reason we weren't able to take another bite out of it this year, was as we talked about at the very first part of this conversation, there was not a lot of ongoing money that the legislature could use for it. So in other words, if they're going to reduce a revenue stream, they have to pay for that with another revenue stream in order to make it work budget wise. And this year there just was not a lot of extra, or there never is any extra, but there wasn't a lot of one-time money that we could get in there and fight for. And I have not seen projections so far about what kind of revenue year think they're going to have in the next fiscal year, which is the next budget the legislature will be making next February, March. But assuming that there are, and I do think it's safe to assume there will have a little bit better budget year, at least this year. Assuming there is money, we'll be right back in there fighting for that again next year, I assume, Alan. I mean, you're the one that will ultimately call the shot on that. But my expectation is as soon as there's money, we're going to go try to fight for it for that reason.
Well, and it's fun to be in my position because when I hear our members talk about their main priorities, that's what helps set our priorities as far as legislation goes. And we hear from our members all the time, this is the number one issue that they're frustrated about. We've made huge progress on who actually has to pay the state tax on Social Security, but people just feel like it's unfair. It's a tax on a tax, and we're one of 9 states that still taxes Social Security. It puts us at a huge disadvantage for people wanting to retire here. And so our members tell us, keep fighting the fight. This year, of course, there wasn't an opportunity, but we will. We'll continue considering and sussing out the year and fighting the fight.
Absolutely, we're going to get that off eventually.
Yeah,
we've made great strides, but we're going to get it all soon enough.
I think so. France asked the question, and I can't remember if you would know this off the top of your head. I can't remember. What's the fiscal note on the full elimination of Social Security taxes? I want to say that it's in the 120-ish million range. Go ahead.
The last time, which was the last legislative session, the last time we took a chunk out of it, the fiscal note was 122 million. Now, what I don't know now is what it would be. We took a chunk out of it then, and I don't know what the new number would be, but I do think it's significantly below 100 million now.
That's good to know. Yeah. I mean, it's a big amount of money. And, in the state of Utah, all income taxes go to education. There's a little tiny carve out now for services for people with disabilities, but that upper and lower education issue, it's tough because when we take money out of income taxes, it affects the funding for schools, and of course, that makes it a challenging fight to fight. Charlie, any
It
thoughts
is
on
when
that?
you consider that. I think around, you may know this number better than me, Alan, but I think around 20, if you wanted to add 1% to the weighted pupil unit for schools, it's about $27 million. And so that's the kind of balancing act that legislators are trying to do. And we understand that. And we certainly are not opposed to public education anyway. But we do think we have a just argument here, and we've been gradually winning it, and we will eventually win it completely.
Yeah, I agree. If there are any other questions, I'm going to open it up now. But if not, Charlie, start thinking about kind of your final thoughts as we wrap up. So, anybody who wants to ask a question, now is the time. Put that in the chat, and otherwise, I'm going to have Charlie just give his kind of final thoughts here. We'll give it about 10 seconds to see if anybody has any other questions. Okay, doesn't look like it. Charlie, final thoughts on this year's session?
Well, thank you so much. I enjoy so much. It's such an honor for me, and I mean that sincerely, to represent AARP. Nationally, that I think they do a good job, but especially here, we have such good leadership out of the office here, and you, Alan. And I'm sorry that Joseph couldn't be on here today because he is fantastic as well. And we worked a lot on a crypto bill, which I'm glad didn't come up a lot in this call because I had to rely so much on Joseph's expertise on that bill that I'm not sure I could explain it that well. But it is such an honor to represent AARP and to be involved. It's so nice to have everybody that's on this call today. I hope that everybody lets their voices be heard through AARP. We love representing you guys and love to hear what you have to say and think. We're so indebted to Alan and the leadership that he shows here in Utah. We're so fortunate to have such able leadership here. And I think that has really made us more and more effective at the legislative session. Starts at the top and it goes all the way down to through people like me, to getting input from everybody, from the grass tops, the grassroots, and people willing to participate on calls like this that really help us be effective in the legislature. And so I want to thank you guys. I love you guys. I love AARP, and I love representing you. And I really do appreciate the time you've given to this call today. And please feel free to reach out to us, because even outside of this call, we're happy to answer questions anytime we can.
Absolutely. Well, and Charlie, the feeling is absolutely mutual. First, thank you for those kind words. I so appreciate the great work that you do on behalf of AARP. It's I think we're working on maybe our 13th year together. Am I remembering?
I believe that's right. Yes.
And, I remember when we very first started having conversations about pulling in a full-time expert to help us, Charlie's name came up very frequently. And when we had the opportunity to sit down and share thoughts about where we were and what we were looking for, you were just so precisely dialed in to understanding the bipartisan nature of who we are as an organization, that we don't fight fights on the basis of, any kind of Republican or Democratic divide. You really understood and got it. And it's been a pleasure working with you. Truly, I don't know that there's anybody who understands the processes better and understands the background and kind of the thinking that's up there. So thank you for all you do. And as you mentioned, thank you to all of our participants on the call today. We couldn't do this without our membership. The strength that AARP has is that we've got 240,000 members in the state. And that's what makes legislators sit up and listen, is that we can rally our members towards these important issues. And so thank you for being here today. Thank you to all of our participants today. We want to make sure that you know that you can become an AARP advocate. You can get regular updates about the issues that matter to you. If you want to do that, you can sign up at aarp.org/get involved. That's aarp.org/get involved. And we've got tons of free events coming up in the next few months. Keep an eye out for an in-person fraud event that we're going to be working on with the FBI. It's a fabulous thing. You don't want to miss that. So if you want more information, go to our website. That's aarp.org/UT. This concludes our call, and we hope all of you have an absolutely fabulous day. Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you all.
See y'all.